Hey guys, this is Ash and you're watching Readathon. So today I'm doing my June wrap-up and Maassive Readathon wrap-up. I am currently in Goa and it is just so green, and I've been on the beach for the last few days and I just wanted to film here before I leave today. So I'm gonna film part of my June wrap-up here and then film the rest later. So let's start off by talking about the Maassive Readathon. The Maassive Readathon is a readathon based on Sarah J. Maas's universe, and it is based on Throne of Glass this year specifically, and it is just so much fun already, and I'm only a third of the way through the month. It's the 9th today, and I have read quite a few books, and some of them were really good. So I am super excited to talk about it. Okay, so basically the goal is to read books based on prompts at different locations as I go from a port city on the way to Orinth for Aelin's coronation. I have to get there by June 30th and collect people as we go. And my personal goal is to collect every single person I can. So that is an additional challenge, and just there's a lot of birds around, so there's a lot of noise. Okay, so the first book I read this month was The Heart Principle, and it was about this girl Anna whose boyfriend basically tells her he wants to have an open relationship, and so she decides to make the most of it and meets Kwan, and it's just her finding a way to say, like, you know, put herself first and not bend to everyone else's expectations, and I really like that in a book. I read this for Bengali, which is an EOA where Nehemia is from, and the prompt was to read a book with a protective sibling, and Kwan is a protective sibling to his brother Guy. We see him in The Bride Test, and he is such a good brother. And the next, I also read this for Irene, for which I had to read a book that's been on my TBR the longest, and this has been on my TBR since it came out. It's been on my physical TBR since it came out, and I gave this book a 4 stars. The next book I read was Where's Waldo, which I read but did not rate. I read it with my little brother, but since it was just looking at pictures, I didn't feel comfortable reading it. I read it for the Juan prompt, for which we had to read a Where's Waldo. So I read the first one, and then I also read it for Oasis of Birch, which I pronounced or called something completely different in my TBR, which linked up above in the card right now. And I was like, okay, I'm only gonna have to read any book while drinking a fruity drink, so a mango smoothie while reading Where's Waldo totally makes sense. Okay, so the next book I read was The Unhoneymooners, which I gave, I think, 4 stars. It's about Olive and Ethan. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. I might be forgetting his name, because that's a possibility. But it's about Olive and this guy whose siblings just got married, and they had a honeymoon that was like paid for, free or something like that, and they got sick. So Olive and Ethan had to take up their places because Olive's twin sister was the one on file. So, I mean, she could just go instead with Amy's ID and enjoy a free trip to Hawaii. And it was just a really fun book. And it's like them faking being married while in Hawaii so they don't get charged for this honeymoon. And quite a fun story. So I read this for Lorcan, which I had to read a Grumpy Sunshine book for. And for Bogdano Jungle, which I had to read a book set in a tropical setting, which this one hit both on the mark. The next book I read was The Daughter of the Pirate King. So this one I read for Morath and for Dorian. I gave this book a 2 star. So for Dorian, I had to read a book with shadows on the cover, and for Morath, I had to read a book with skull on the cover. And there's an alternate edition of this book with both. And so this book is about Alosa, a pirate king's daughter, who goes on the ship to kind of trick them into thinking they kidnapped her and are holding her for ransom while she's looking for something. But I won't say more than that because it would be a spoiler. The reason I gave it a 2 stars is because I was struggling with the characters, really. But later on, the story did get better, especially in the next book, which I read next, The Daughter of Siren Queen, which I gave 3 stars. I read that one for Skull's Bay, which I had to read a book with pirates. And I also read it for, I believe I read it for Fenris, which I had to read a book with a TikTok trend, based on a TikTok trend. And this one definitely fits both because pirates, Azosa is a pirate, Raiden a pirate. And then if you know that song that's about like the Pirate King's daughter, I'm pretty sure it has something to do with sirens as well. Fits perfectly. It's popular on TikTok, at least on my For You page, so it fits. But I'm not going to tell you much more about The Daughter of the Siren Queen because it would spoil the Pirate King. So moving on to the next. The next book I read was the Meet Cute Diaries, which is something I read for Rifthold, and it is to read a book with diverse representation. This book has a trans character that's the main lead, and I loved seeing this kid shine. I gave this book a 3 star, solely because since this was about a 16-year-old character, there were some things a 16-year-old does that gets on your nerves. But I will say, just remember, this person's 16. They're gonna be annoying. Like, I was freaking annoying when I was 16, so it's normal. So let's not hold us above Noah. Anyway, so it's just what I've read so far. I will update you guys as I read more and film again towards the end of the month. But I just wanted to film one with this gorgeous tropical looking background. So we're now halfway through the month and I've read a few more books, so I wanted to talk about them. I'm currently in Mumbai, so it's stop number 2 on my trip this summer. And yeah, let's move on. So the next book I read was Serpent and Dove, which is about a witch and a witch hunter entering into a marriage of convenience, and is quite an interesting story. I gave it a 4 star. And the magic system in this world is really interesting. It's got like a cost system and a balance, and it's just really unique, and I loved it. I am now determined to read the rest of the series. I'd already planned on reading 2 books, but I'm going to incorporate book number 3 as well. I might change it up and do that as my Orinth book, because it does have found family, so it would definitely fit. And yeah. So with that being said, I read this for Manan, which was to read a book with witches, and this obviously has witches. It's got Lou and Coco in their covens, and it's quite a great book. And then also I'm also reading it for Rune Mountain, which was to read a book with star-crossed lovers, which a witch hunter and a witch totally are. Okay, the next book I read was Count on Your Lucky Stars, and this is a second chance romance, which I read for Adian, which was to read a second chance romance. It's about these 2 women who were best friends growing up and had a kind of a relationship when they were teenagers. And because of a misunderstanding, they didn't end up together back then, and they come back together after one of the characters, Liv, has a divorce and moves to the city where Margot lives, and they kind of run into each other, and Liv is planning Margot's best friend's wedding, and kind of gets roped into their shenanigans. And they also end up being roommates, so it's got all the tropes. I highly recommend it. I gave it a 4 stars. It's so much fun. And yeah, the next book I read, and the last book I've read so far, is Blood and Honey. I gave that 4 stars as well. It's the continuation of Serpent and Dove, so I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But it is a great book, and I love the characters. And I read it for Wolf Tribe because it was to read a book with wolves in it, and this one has wolves. It's got werewolves, so it totally fits. And then I'll see y'all with more updates later. So this is the final part of the wrap-up, and we're in Gurgaon at my home, and I finally got the time to slow down and read a lot. So I want to talk about all of the amazing books I read for the rest of the month. So the first book I read was for the Fairy and Gap, which was to read a book with dragons. and whilst I loved the book I ended up reading, I was not excited about it at the beginning. I read The Tea Garden Society. It is the cutest story, and to me it felt like a children's book, but it totally appealed to me as someone who doesn't read children's book very often. It was fantastic. I loved it. I absolutely adored the characters. These kids were just amazing and so innocent and beautiful, and the whole story about them adopting dragons who have lost their family, it felt so wholesome. I gave this book a 3 stars, and the series just got better. I fell in love with this series so much I decided to read the rest of the 2 books, and I read it for different prompts. The next one I read for Aniel, which was to read a short book, and this, honestly, I read all 3 of these in one day, so definitely short books. I read Tea Garden Festival for Aniel and gave that a 4 star because I feel like this is when I was like super into it. I loved this story the best because the main character was just such an adventurous go-getter, and I absolutely love it about them, and they're just such a good character. The next book I read was for Briarcliff, which was to read a book with a red cover, and I read Tea Garden Tapestry for that. The cover has reds and oranges, and it's just vibrant, but it does have red, so, and it looks pretty red to me, like overall, so red cover. And I gave it a 4 star as well, and this one like kind of meshes the characters from both the books, and I loved it. And it's just, I highly recommend these books, especially if you're gonna read it to your kids, because it's just the cutest books ever. The best part about it is a queer kids book, and I've just never seen that before, and I love that so much. The next place I went to was the Jungle of Morla, for which I had to read a comfort book, and for that one I read Leverage and Death. I have really been getting back into the In Death series over the last few months, and it's become such a comforting series for me. Anytime I'm like seeking something to read and I don't know what I'm gonna do, I just reach for these books. So I decided to go with the next book on my TBR that was in that series. And then after that, I went to Amaroth, where I had to read a book with a white cover. So I went with Connections in Death. It has a half white cover, and the bottom is like a scene in New York, but it's mostly white, so I totally counted it. And I gave both the In Death books 4 stars. So the next book I read was for Alsbrook, for which I had to read a book by an underrepresented author, and I read a book by a queer author, and it is The Key to You and Me. I gave it a 3 star, and it was a good book. It was just teenagers, and they were definitely acting like teenagers, which made it a little teenagey. I don't know, I used the word teenager too many times. It is cute. It's definitely better suited to young adult readers. It's a story of self-discovery, of coming of age, and just growing and finding your place in the world. It did feel a little bit Insta-lovey to me, and that is where I was like docking the points in my head. Okay, the next book I read was for Peranth, and it was to read a book that reminds you of your favorite musician. And this one I read Falling Stars by Sarah Matterson. I saw a TikTok by her on TikTok, and she talked about how she kind of like based the beginning of like Taylor Swift and Tom Hiddleston, and Taylor Swift is my all-time favorite celebrity, not just musician. She's just a great person. I love her, and yeah, I was like, okay, I have to read it, and I read it and I loved it. I gave it a 4 stars. I wish there was a bit more groveling, but 4 stars nonetheless. The next book I read was for Orinth, which is the end location for the Maassive Readathon, and I made it to Aelin's coronation in time, in fact with time and change, and it was to read a book with Found Family. I decided to finish out the Serpent and Dove series and read Gods and Monsters. So Gods and Monsters is definitely Found Family. The gang definitely feels like family. They love each other, care for each other, fight for each other. Definitely Readathon family. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 star, and I loved it. It was a great book. I did feel like it was a little dragged on and didn't need to be. There was like one aspect of this book I'm like, you could have cut it out and still have a great book. It would just be shorter, and that might have been better. Okay. And then the last book for the readathon that I read was for Rowan, which was to read the readathon book, which was the Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, which I also gave 4 stars. It was a great folklore retelling, and you just really loved the representation of Asian culture in this book. I loved the characters. The only thing that bothered me was the character's age. I just wish she was a little bit older. She was 16 in this book. I feel like this book would have been a lot better if she was maybe in her 20s, and it would have been a great book. I mean, it is a great book, but it would have been a better book. But regardless, it was such a fun book, and I had a blast with it. Okay. While that was the end of what I read for the Maassive readathon, I did read a few more books in the month of June. The next book I read was Golden in Death. I was initially planning on having this be my last book, so I switched. Like, I skipped a book in the In Death series because I was gonna use that for a prompt this month. I was gonna use that book as a prompt in July. Decided to go against it, and then just because I could not read it, so I finished reading that book too, but I'll talk about that. Golden in Death is book number 50 of the In Death series, and it was fantastic. In this book, the victims are these like really good people who you just like feel for, and you're like, why did this happen to them? They're honestly amazing people. It hurts me to see them hurt. And Eve Dallas, the warrior, the justice seeker, does her job, and she's amazing. I gave this 4 stars. Now, I went back to book number 49 because I was like, I can't not read it, so forget about next month. I'm reading it now. Finished reading it in a day, and I gave it a 5 star. Absolutely loved it. And oh my god, so in this book, the killer is actually going by Lady Justice, and she's killing really bad people. Well, and she's giving them her brand of justice. And Eve kind of struggles with that because she's like, I can't let her get away, because even though she's killing some bad people, because she doesn't have the right to take law into her own hands. And we see Eve take on this person who believes in her mind that she is absolutely correct in what she's doing. And it's just a really good dynamic. And we do see scenes from the killer's perspective. And I think I normally dislike that, but in this book that gels really well. And it just becomes a cohesive piece, in my opinion. But I absolutely loved it. It was such a good book to end the month on. And I honestly finished it like with barely any time to spare for June, because I finished it at like 11:30 at night. So that is it for the month of June. I had quite a lot of fun participating in the Maassive readathon and reading all of these amazing books. I absolutely loved some of these books. Some I was like, why am I even reading it? But overall, it was a fantastic experience. And I hope you enjoyed seeing all of these different places, even though you only saw like a teeny bit of it. But also, now that I'm looking at myself in this, my hair colors changed in every single one of those videos because my dye has been fading. Anyway, so that is it. Next month, I'll be doing Maassive readathon again, but this time I'll be finishing last year's Maassive readathon because I missed that. And it was based on ACOTAR, and I'm like, I have to do that. So I have a TBR planned, and I have a video planned for you soon for that. And I'll see you later.